Good morning. My name is Al D'Angelo, if you haven't figured that out yet. Was a pastor at River Tree for about 30 years, and I do something different. I'll tell you in a minute right now, but I was a friend of Dan and Shannon's up to this point. It's up in the air kind of now. So I'm happy to be with you in this series, and welcome to those of you on mochurch.tv listening online with us. So this morning we're continuing in the series, These Are My People, and we're lasering in this morning on, I'm not sure how you feel about this, it's your work people. So people you work with, people you work for, people who are peers and teammates of yours, and people that report to you, and right, we're in that world this morning, so you might have to get your head in the right spot and kind of what God has in mind for you there. So eventually, down the road, this is a few minutes down the road, we're going to be in Luke 10. We're not going to be there for a while, but if you want to turn there, Luke 10 is where we're going to be. And so I'm a bit of a gearhead, and so kind of a nerd in that way. And one of my favorite biographies is something somebody handed me about 10 years ago. It was the biography of R.G. Letourneau. Anybody ever heard that name, R.G. Letourneau? Yeah, no gearheads in this room. Yeah, hey, big round of applause, right? Yeah, so this guy, it's kind of fairly unknown, lived in the late 1800s through most of the 1900s and was credited for inventing the earth mover and the bulldozer, right? So he invented big stuff back when a time when they were moving dirt with mules and, iron pans and stuff. So he invented the earth mover and some other incredible equipment. Hundreds of patents, changed the face of that excavation industry. So it's tons of stuff that I would love to own, but it's tough to convince your wife that you need to buy. So if I go out and go, hey, honey, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is I had to spend $220,000 on a used earth mover. The good news is I can probably do that flower bed in about 18 seconds now. So it's good. But in that biography, one of the things I love is kind of for this morning. So he grew up in a pretty decent, Christ-centered home, but then just kind of runs away from everything, God included, for the next, 5, 6, 7 years of his life. So he's in his, I think, late 20s. He had started down this road of building a business, but he has this wake-up call. I think he's at a revival in California one night, and God just gets his attention. And the next morning, he decides to go into the pastor's office who was leading that revival, and he's like, listen, he's like, God's got my attention again, and I'm ready to do whatever he wants. Open-handed, I'll walk away from my business. I'll sell everything. I'm ready to be a missionary or a pastor. And the guy sitting there at the desk turned around and said, listen, he's like, I don't think that's what you're supposed to do. He's like, I think God's calling you to go back into the work and business world. He's like, he's put you there, positioned you there. You already have influence. Go live on mission in that work business world. And I think, having done both things now, that is the calling for most Christ followers is, how are you living on mission where God's already put you? He might be calling you. I would never say that he's not, or he might call you in the future to be a pastor or missionary overseas, absolutely. But the way Christianity spread in the Roman Empire in the early days was regular people like all of us going to where they actually lived, worked, and played, and finding ways to talk to people about the best things in the universe. Really, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning in kind of your work life. So you might know, so I was a pastor for 30 years at River Tree, which was a great privilege, had its difficulties, wonderful. God had called me there. Honestly, I would still be there probably if God hadn't paved the way for me to move into something else. So what I do now is I'm a leadership consultant. I go in and teach leaders and teams how to lead people, basically how to build great teams, great culture. It's something I was exposed to about 7 or 8 years ago, really, really good. So we decided to do an experiment back in about 2018 at River Tree with me, and I decided to do it. And so I was trained as a consultant, and so what we did is I cut my pastor role in half, basically. I was half-time at the church, and then half-time I was out trying to build this business. And I'd never built a business doing anything in my life, and I'm not really that kind of guy. But honestly, I don't know any other way to tell you other than God blessed it like crazy. It just gave me things I didn't work for, paved the way ahead of me. I can't even describe to you. I don't even know everything he did to make this work, but it's been amazing. And then at 2020, it was time for me to do this full time. There was all kinds of signals that God was setting me up to do it. And so I do that full time now. out in the world. But the idea was, back when we did it in 2018, is, hey, I'm going to go out into the real world and try to live on mission in the marketplace in these companies and school districts and nonprofits I get to work with. And it's been this incredible gift. And my eyes have been open to all kinds of things I would not have seen. And the other thing I tell people this all the time, I'm sitting with people, talking with people, building relationship with people that I never would have met as a pastor, right? And so that's the conversation we're having here this morning, because you sitting there right now, you have all kinds of connections at work, people you know that trust you, have a relationship with you, have a friendship with, that nobody on this platform would ever meet, probably, right? You're there. God has parked you there, put you there, set you there as a person of influence. And so those are your people. Those are your work people. You could kind of think about it that way. So if you think about this, you think about your work world, again, that whole world of people that you work with and for and who work for you. So who's in that world that you would say, if I just made you write down a list this morning, like, hey, who's 2, 3, 4, 5 people that I'm pretty sure I have a pretty decent relationship with, but I'm pretty sure they're away from the God who made them. They're outside of a saving, trust, relationship, connection with Jesus. Like good people, decent people, but I'm pretty sure that they and God are not friends right now. They've walked away from him somehow, some way. So if you think about who's on that list, I'd love you to get those people in your head, actually, as we talk this morning. And if you really believe there is a God and he loves them and he died for them, you can't just pretend everything's okay, because this is like our calling, our mission. Like, what are you going to do? Well, when I watch Jesus move throughout the New Testament, this is way oversimplified, but there's something I see that I call the good news, great news model of Jesus. He would go into a conversation with a person. He'd go into a town, a village, a hillside, and he would bring good news. He would feed them, heal them, have conversations that made them feel welcome and included and whole and dignified again. He's bringing good news. And then, for whoever was ready, whoever was willing, he was ready to tell them the great news of who God was and what he had done for them and the incredible gift that he was inviting them to, right? The good news, great news posture. And I think that's been a pretty good framework for me to set up my life at work in the work world, is like good news, great news. So the work I do as a consultant, leading, building teams, training, like that's the good news. It's not the point. It's not the great news. It's good. I love what I do, and I love getting to help people, but it's my platform. It's not the point. So for you, doing well at your job is your platform. It's the good news, hopefully. And so what I wanted to do is start this morning, give you a couple thoughts, and this is like part sermon, part if you were interviewing me and asking me, well, what do I think about how to do this well, have spiritual, intentional conversations at work, think about your people at work. Here's the stuff I would tell you. I'll tell you almost nothing I'm going to tell you this morning is rocket science, but hopefully I'm going to reinforce some things that you might already know and think. So the first thing, if you're going to be good news at work, like you're going to use that as a good platform, you got to be a good worker and a good teammate. Like this sounds stupid, but you've got to be a good worker and a good teammate. Colossians 3:23, work willingly at whatever you do as though you're working for the Lord rather than for people. And when you do that, if you're working for an audience of one, let me see if I can get that pop out of my mic. So if you're working for an audience of one, then you actually, your eyes are on Jesus. I'm going to work as if I'm working for him. And then what that does is build great credibility for the people around you because you're doing your job well, right? Do your job well. Work hard when it's time to work hard. So if in my business, if I don't return phone calls or don't prep for my meetings or I'm lazy, like people are not going to listen to anything I have to say about the deeper parts of life because I'm not even good at the basic stuff. So be a good worker. Be a great teammate. Don't be talking when it's time to work. Right? Work hard when it's time to work hard. Do your job well. High quality, good attitude, servant-hearted. If you are lazy or negative or if you're prone to gossip, your credibility is undermined and people are not going to listen to you when you want to talk to them about the bigger stuff. So platform part one or good news part one is just do a good job as a worker, whatever your job is. The other thing I would add to that is about your posture or the way you think about the people that you work with. So, as somebody wisely said, you might have heard this already. I love this phrase. When I'm telling another human being about the things of God and what He's done for them, it's like one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. Right? Have you heard that before? Right? That's our posture with other human beings. It's not like, hey, I'm amazing and I'm going to tell you all the good stuff you need to do to become amazing like me. Or what in the world's the matter with you? Right? Our posture has to be like one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread, even with the people that we work with. I love Luke 18 for this. It's where my mind always goes. It's the parable that Jesus tells about a Pharisee and a tax collector. So he says, 2 men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee. So Pharisee is a fairly legalistic, religious kind of leader, known for being kind of judgmental and arrogant. Honestly, if you can get that kind of person in your head. And the other was a despised tax collector, so kind of bottom of the barrel, known for being a thief and a cheater and a liar. They both go to the temple to pray. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. I thank you, God, that I'm not a sinner like everyone else. I don't cheat, I don't sin, I don't commit adultery. I'm certainly not like that tax collector over there. Wow, that's arrogant. I fast twice a week, I give you a tenth of my income. But the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "O God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner." So I meet a lot of Christians who will talk negatively about the people that they work with, and this can be a favorite sport if you're not careful, right? They love to beat down the people that they work with, come home and tell stories to their family. You know, it could be like they're praying in the temple. God, I thank you that I'm not like my degenerate coworkers. I don't smoke weed. I don't yell at my spouse. I'm an involved parent. I go to church. I give to charity. I turn in my reports on time. I never take home any office pens. Or you can have the posture of saying, you know what, Lord, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner. Somebody came up to me one time when I was in the pastor role. It was about 10 years ago. And they were kind of like, happy about this, like kind of proud to tell me, like, hey, Al, hey, good news, I got the person that I work with to stop swearing. And on the inside, I didn't say this out loud at the time, I'm like, who cares? I mean, really. Because what I wanted them to see is the people that you work with, their biggest problem is not that they swear, get drunk on the weekends, or sleeping with people they're not married to. Their biggest problem is they're separated from the God who made them and loves them and died for them. And that's my problem, and that's your problem. Like, that's our thing. We're all in this together. That's got to be our posture with the people that we work for or work with and who work for us. Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. Before I ever get to think about anybody else, I got to start there. Okay? So we're all in the same spot. All right, the last part of the platform, I'd tell you, again, really simple, maybe doesn't even need said, but I think it does, is build real relationship and trust with people. For most people, you want to have any kind of a spiritual, deeper conversation about the bigger parts of life. This is a non-negotiable these days. There are people that you can walk up to, and when you first meet them, have a spiritual conversation, but not many, and I would say a lot less than there used to be. Right? So people need real relationship and real trust. There's a high level of trust. That bar is very high for most people to be willing to have conversations about the kind of stuff we want to talk to them about when it comes to what God's done for them and who He is and what He's like. And that means things like serve them, listen to them, help them, talk with them about regular stuff, be a trustworthy, loyal friend first, and you might get the chance to talk with them about the best things in the universe. I did the funeral for one of my good friends about 2 years ago, and one of the things I said about him is he was a fully human Christian. And I don't know if that'll make sense, but he was able to be a really regular, fantastic human being. He loved life, loved people. He had a Snapple collection in his house, and he loved being on the water. Like, he was just like a fully human, but he was always having conversations with people about who God was and what He was like and what the invitation He had for them. And he was masterful at just being a real human being that was trustworthy and honest and authentic. And I think that's magnetic. And it's actually part of your non-negotiable platform, I think, if you're going to have real conversations with people that you work with. So what I do when I'm out, and I work for, the way my job works is I work for, 6, 8, 10 companies in the course of a year, and I work with teams inside of there and individual leaders. And so I'm always going in there kind of praying, like, God, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to do my thing well. And God, is there somebody here that you want me to have a better, deeper conversation with? Or move my life up next to a little bit, or follow up with a little bit. And sometimes there's no one, and sometimes there's 2, 3, 4 people. And so one thing you need to know about today is there's a lot of stories about conversations with people that I work with that I would love to tell you, but I'm not going to because I love them more than I love you, and I'm sorry. Because I treasure and count that relationship as a privilege. And if they've trusted me with that, I'm not going to talk with you about it. And I want you to do the same kind of thing with it when people trust you with stuff. Be careful with it. But I did get permission from one of my friends that I work with. I'll tell you about him. He's a supervisor at a construction company. He's about 50 years old, leads about 5 foremen and all their crews in an excavation world. I've been coaching him in leadership and working with his foreman for a few years. He's one of my favorite people that I work with. We are friends. His wife and daughter, both Christ followers, kind of running after God that way, but he's not so sure. He's still checking this whole thing out. He's had some pain in his life. He's seen some suffering. It bothers him a lot, makes him question who God is and what he's like. But he's real and he's honest, and his questions are amazing. They're so good. So I called him Tuesday for some advice. I left him a voicemail. Actually, I'm like, hey, could you call me back? I need some advice. And so he calls me back. He goes, hey, I thought it was a wrong number because why in the world would you be calling me for advice? I'm like, no, I want to ask you some questions. So I told him I would be talking to you this morning. And I said, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Tell me what you would tell them. Like if there's a room full of people who might have interest in talking to the people that they work with about the things that God has done and what he's like, what would you tell them? So I asked him, I said, why are you even willing to talk with me about the deeper parts of life? He said, well, he's like, number one, he's like, I kind of want to talk about them, but I can't find safe people to do it with. He's like, so I trust you. So you've demonstrated you actually care about me enough that I can trust you with this. I've had some rough times in my life. I want answers. It's like he said to me, he's like, I want to believe, but he's like, there's stuff blocking me, and I can't really find the place to talk about it, is kind of what he was saying. He said, I need real, honest conversation. I'm a skeptic, and I can trust you with my questions and my actual thoughts, and you listen. Okay, again, simple stuff. I said, what else would you tell a room like this? He said, well, without that trust, you can't have these conversations, what I said before, which takes time and listening and actually helping with real-life situations. So, and this is true not just of this place, but other places I work, where there's other Christians there that this guy may not have been willing to have a conversation with. And I said, why? And he said, well, for example, he said, if I see somebody who wears a lot of Christian bling, T-shirts, hats, that kind of stuff, he's like, I don't want to talk to them. They use a lot of religious language. I don't want to talk to them. Because he said, and I'm just going to give you his words, he's like, it looks to me often like they're trying to prove to themselves that they're Christians. They're not really thinking about me. Like, that's interesting. Okay? So I thought it was very fascinating and honest. He said, I think a true Christian is able to be noticed by being themselves. They shouldn't have to wear anything. Also, he said, somebody who tries to shoehorn Jesus into too many conversations feels manipulative. He's like, feels like you're trying to force me into something, manipulate me. And he's like, that's going to make me run. He said, honestly, Al, with you, it's different. He said, you ask simple questions, and it turns into other things. You start small, you whittle away, and you get me to see stuff that maybe you were trying to get me to see. So let me say another thing right here that needs said, and it's this. And I really believe I could have invited this guy to church for a decade, and he would have never shown up. Like, he was never coming anywhere. Like, he already had his roadblocks up. He wasn't coming anywhere. When I was a pastor, there were times I would get up and tell our church to stop inviting people to church as their first move. Because some cases it's a great move. You got to just listen to what God's telling you about this person. Like, sometimes it's fantastic. Other times it's exactly the wrong thing to do. Because and then you pepper them like, hey, I'm going to invite you 5, 6, 7, 8 times a year. Well, maybe after the second no, you should look for a different approach and go, maybe they want to have a real conversation with a human being that they trust before they're ever willing to do something as daring and courageous like walk in these doors. right? So I used to tell our people, stop inviting people to church as your first move. The whole point of a series like this is let's build up your muscle to go have some early conversations and ask some questions and start the conversation about some deeper things before you come in here and all the hired guns take over, right? Do you understand what I mean? Like build that. I'm not telling you can't invite people to church, but be discerning when you do, and you take the initiative to start some of these conversations. Because what people want, they're scared to come into a place like this often. What they want is somebody they know and love and trust to have some deep conversations with them and to answer some questions or at least think them through, even if you don't know the answers. Right? So that's the point of a series like this. So let's get on to the great news part. Like let's pretend you got a good platform and people trust you and you've done a good job working well, being a great teammate. You got that sort of platform and posture. Like, what do you do if you're ready to have a kind of a spiritual, intentional conversation? So I've heard lots of cool stories. One of them I was going to tell you, I just love this approach. This guy, a friend of mine, he was baptized, and a few weeks later, he went into work with a crock pot full of chili. And he put it in the lunchroom, and he's like, hey, he just went around, popped into a bunch of people's offices. He's like, hey, listen, something fantastic has happened to me. God's done some stuff in my life. I'd love to tell you my story. If you want to come and have a bowl of chili with me at lunch, I'd love to. And like half the office came in, ate some chili, and he told a story. Like, that's cool, right? Really good, creative, not forceful, not manipulative, very honest, really good. So let me give you some basic things. That's a cool idea. And there's lots of those creative things I think that you can do. But here would be my first thing I would say. In most cases, I would say ask questions and start where they are. So don't start with your statements. Start with questions and start where they are. So the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, you might know, really called to share Christ with a big part of the Roman Empire that did not know Jesus, living wildly away from the things of God. But he's out in that world of Gentiles, they're so-called non-Jewish people. And he finds himself in Athens, Greece at one point, an extremely religious but misguided city. All you have to do is remember back to your school days and all the Greek gods you had to study, and right? So they had statues set up all over the city to these dozens of Greek gods. Paul goes to Athens. He's walking around the city, and then he gets to be in a room with some of the city leaders. So Paul standing, it's verse 22, chapter 17 of Acts, he says, Paul standing before the council addressed them as follows. Men of Athens, I see that you're very religious in every way. Kind of an understatement. Where I was walking along, I saw your many shrines and statues. So think about what he could have said. He could be walking around this city, all the statues, all these gods, all made up gods, if you want to just name it. He could have got an audience with their people and go, you idiots. You're worshiping a lot of made-up, worthless idols. Are you insane? Right? Could have gone on the attack, belittled them. What's the matter with you? He does not do that. He does something I think is brilliant. He says, walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it, to the unknown God. This God whom you worship without knowing is the one I'm telling you about. Brilliant. Okay? Then he goes on to tell them about Jesus. He starts where they are. You see that? Not where he thinks they should be, not where he wants them to be, but where they are. You have a statue to an unknown God. You don't know him. Let's start there. This is brilliant. It honors their dignity. This is exactly, so Paul does this in a lot of places. Jesus modeled this. He would start with where a person was, not where he thought they should be. He was so good at this, and that's what I think his expectation of us is start where people are, right? So you're going to come across people who are starting at all kinds of places, right? So you think Christianity is all about rules? Okay, let's start there, right? You think your spouse goes to church on the weekends but then comes home and treats you horribly? Let's start there. You grew up Catholic but drifted away after you left home? Let's start there. You had no spiritual influence growing up? Let's start there. You believe that going after money is the source of hope and happiness? Let's start there. You believe the Bible is a bunch of good stories but no truth to build a life on? Let's start there. You believe there is no God and random evolution is responsible for everything you see, including yourself? Let's start there. No condemnation, no judgment. Start where they are, not where you think they should be. And by the way, included in that is no Christianese. Don't use excessive religious words. They're not helpful. It might just be propping yourself up. If there's some theological word you've got to use, explain it. But otherwise, talk in normal human language. Do you understand what I mean? Like, there's nothing worse than somebody who's trying to have a spiritual conversation with somebody who's away from God, and they're using all this insider Christian language. It is really frustrating. If you watch it, and that person's probably going to run, because it's not going to make any sense. And it's going to make you feel like you're up here and they're down here, right? You kind of want them up here and you down here, right? Do what it takes to serve them. So ask questions. Back to my supervisor construction friend. This all got started because a few years ago I'd been working with him for probably a year and a half or 2 years, and I finally felt like God was telling me to ask him a question or two, and I just started with a simple one. I'm like, hey, man, tell me, we've never talked about this. I said, would you tell me like a little bit of your faith background, church background, if there's anything there? Just a starter question. That phrasing I just used is almost exactly the way I say it. I don't think I've, in 7-8 years of doing this, I don't think I've had anyone turn me down on that question. Like, whatever it's worth. Just tell me, like, would you tell me your story, your faith background story? Almost everyone will tell me that story. So he started talking a little, and then every once in a while, I would ask him another question. Not every time we talked, but like, I'd come back maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks later, I'd come back and I'd try another question, see if he wanted to talk some more, and he would talk a little more. I got the chance to pray with him about his wife and some health issues, and we talked some more. Shared some Bible texts, drew him a couple pictures about what Jesus had done for him. And like this conversation started. Then every once in a while, he'll pick the phone and call me about a spiritual question. And like things just and every time I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. Because it's a privilege to have these conversations with people. And that's the posture I'd love you to have, is like when people will trust you with this, it's a privilege. So don't take that lightly. So I'd done this with a few other guys around that team, and this past winter, I went to them and I was like, hey, if I started something like 6 a.m. every other week, and we just talk about the Bible and your questions and just see where it goes, would you be up for it? And so that guy said yes, and 5 other guys said yes. And I honestly, to be honest with you, I felt like God was telling me to do it 2 winters ago, but I was not obedient to it. This final one, this last winter, I was like, yeah, I need to do something. And I was scared because I'm like, these guys they're all going to say no. I mean, that was really what was in my head. They all said yes. And so we started talking about 6 months ago. So before I go on with that, before I say one more thing, when you're talking with somebody about these deeper things, spiritual things, asking them questions about their faith background, if they're giving you body language signals to shut up, shut up. I had a professor one time that told me that, an evangelism professor. He's like, most Christians are missing all kinds of social cues that people are telling them to shut up and stop talking, and they don't shut up. When it's time to shut up, shut up. It's a way of you protecting people's dignity and respecting them. Jesus did it all the time. He was never forcing himself on people. Don't you do it either, right? When people are telling you to shut up. So get good at watching and listening before you're plowing through your monologue. Listen and watch. Be careful, right? So let's go to this idea of talking to people you work with about the things of God and deeper stuff. Like, it's a risk, right? It could be a risk to your job, honestly, and you got to decide what you're willing to risk for the sake of Christ. I've had this bite me a couple times in different settings, but I'm willing to lose this client, this job, because I'm trying to be in here and be obedient to what God's asking me to do. So let's go to this. The thing that has helped me, and you need to know, I am not an evangelist. I'm not even an extrovert. Like, my people energy is limited in a day. I always tell people, like, I love people way more than I can be with them, right? So I have, like, limited amounts of energy, right? But God is still using me. And the game changer for me, like 10 years ago, somebody taught me this thing called the person of peace principle out of Luke 10. I'm going to teach it to you right now in a short version. But it's a game changer, because I'm not the guy who can start spiritual conversations on a plane. And, like, I'm no Dan Smith, right? I'm not. I sit in rooms and I'm like, yeah, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. But this thing has changed the way I do this. So Luke 10, start with verse 4. I don't think that one's on the screen. It might be. So Luke 10, Jesus is sending out 70 of his followers to go into towns and villages and start telling them, the people, about the kingdom of God. right? So he gives them these instructions, which are really sort of amazing, and they have all kinds of great applications right now. So his first thing is don't take any money with you. Don't take an extra bag. Don't take extra sandals. Don't pack anything. Just go, right? And then don't stop and talk to anybody on the road. So that's interesting. So the second one first, why not stop and talk to anybody on the road? Well, it's the idea that this mission is urgent, right? You got to crank up the urgency level. So the people that you work with, this is an urgent conversation. This is like, well, I'll put it off for 5 years or even, 5 weeks because you don't know how much time they have left or how much time you have left, right? So it's urgent. And then don't pack anything. Don't prep anything. It's like, go. His dream is God wants you to trust him with your journey on the way and the outcome and the results and the conversation. He wants you to go with him in a trusting way. Like, I'm going to go out there, and it's kind of scary, but I have to trust God with the process and the results and what I'm going to say. So I'm often in rooms. This happened all the time, and Dan and I would be in rooms back in the days I would be the pastor. I'd sit in those rooms, especially me, and be like, oh my gosh, how do I even get to be in here? Because everybody else is smarter and taller and better looking, and and they have better gift sets. And like you watch people on this stage up here this morning, like, oh my gosh, they're amazing. And I would feel like that all the time and be like, well, yeah, this is all I got, right? But this is the whole point of Luke 10 is like, with what you have, go. Like, I don't get to go out into the world with Dan's gifts or Shannon's gifts or your gifts, and you don't get to go with mine. We have to go with what we've got and then trust God to fill in the gaps, which are substantial, right? But it's like this trusting posture. You're like, God, we are going to go try to talk to my coworker, and you're going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting because I don't even know what to say. Right? It's like that kind of trusting posture. So whenever you enter somebody's home, say first, God's peace be on this house. If those who live there are peaceful, the blessing will stand. If they're not, the blessing will return to you. And then don't move around from house to house. Well, this is kind of like the God's peace is shalom, literally in Jewish language, so it'd be like a very common greeting, like, hey, how you doing? Right? Shalom, God's peace. So it's almost like throw out the greeting and then see what comes back. And in this case, you're watching for what Jesus is describing as the man of peace or person of peace. So it's almost like you're going to start an interaction with someone and see what the connection is like between you, the person of peace. See if they receive it, see if they want to talk to you, see if they want to continue the conversation. And so this idea of looking for people of peace at your work, again, game changer for me. So I go in and I pray and go, God, show me who's here. And it's probably like, God, where are you already at work and that I can join you? Who have you already been talking to, working on, convicting, encouraging, inviting, that I could go join you and working with you for that person's sake? So person of peace. So here's some of the questions we would ask when we talked about the person of peace. Like, how do you figure out who that is? First of all, you pray and ask God to show you. And then it's like somebody that you, honestly, the best description, they welcome you, they receive you, they serve you maybe, but you like them and they like you is believe it or not, is a decent description. Because as one of my friends said, if I'm working with someone and they know I'm a Christ follower and they're not, but they still gravitate toward me, there's a great chance what they're seeing in you is Jesus in you and not just your amazing self. Like, they're gravitating to the Christ in you, right? So it's a sign maybe God's already at work in them. Like, you like them and they like you. But it's got a lot of deeper stuff to it. They welcome you, they receive you, they serve you. This is interesting. So one of my neighbors, I was starting to have these kind of deeper conversations with, and I mean, I was like I don't even know. I was trying to pounce on him a lot. I would almost like sit at my window sometimes and just like look out, see if he was working on anything. I could go help him, Like, oh, you need your lawn mowed or you need help with this project. But what I figured out is that the best thing I could do with him is ask him to come help me. So if I was doing something, I'd be like, hey, man, would you come help me carry this fridge in the house or help me work on my roof or what? And he would just like, oh, yeah, I'd love to help you do that. And it was like he was moving toward me, but it was almost better when he served me and me stopped trying to serve him so much, right? Mutually connect with them, all kinds of things. So you're looking for people around, you're praying for people around you that you would call, God, who are my people of peace? You've put me here at work. Who is probably not following you? They know I follow you, and they move toward me, not away. Like, who is that? Like, just make a list of those people and go, huh, that's interesting. And then Jesus' instruction is, stay there. Like, stay in that home, literally, for those folks back in Luke 10, but stay there. So this is like, stay in that relationship. Figure out how to put some extra energy into it. Move your life up next to them a little bit. Try to talk with them a little more. See if there's time you can go have a cup of coffee. Or like, what would it look like to move your life up next to them a little bit more intentionally? Stay there. Park there. Because guess what? You and I are not the Messiah. We can't save the world. Like, it's almost like you're listening for, hey, where's God put me? Who am I supposed to put my life up near these days, right? That's the person of peace. Now, when it comes to like living that out, one thing to be careful of, if you have people like that and they start inviting you to things, like, hey, come over for dinner, we're all going out for drinks after work, or like be careful at saying no to those invitations, because they'll only ask you a couple of times and then they'll conclude you don't want to spend any time with them. So I'd be very careful. In most cases, I would move heaven and earth to say yes to that kind of invitation. Like, you get a person of peace inviting you over to their house for dinner, over to cookout, you better figure out how to clear some other stuff out of your life and go, because that could be this thing they're wanting something more. So just be careful with saying no to those. But let me give you, as we finish here, let me give you 4 questions that are like a game changer for this, like starting conversation. This could be over a period of weeks or months even. But one of them is, can I hear your story? Like, if you're talking with people, like, hey, tell me your faith story. But before that, hey, tell me your life story. Where'd you grow up? And like just regular stuff. And then get to maybe faith story or church background. Let them tell you their story. One of my friends, he's like, so few people ask other people about their life story and where they came from. He's like, when you do that authentically, it's such a good gift to people. They want to tell their story. Like, make it safe for them to do it and actually listen. Can I pray for you is another question. And don't do it in like, hey, I'll pray for you sometime, but do it in a little more beefed up way. Like, hey, like, make sure, like, can you tell me 2 or 3 things you'd love me to pray specifically about? Or I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm going to pray. Or better yet, could we pray right now? Like, hey, I know, like, let's go off to the side here. I promise it won't be weird. It'll be short, but could I pray for you right now on the spot? Right? I've done that multiple times. Sometimes people say no. I'd say 80% of times I offer that, people say yes, even if they have no connection to God. They'll let me pray for them right there on the spot. Can I tell you my story? Right? So one of the things you need to get good at as a follower of Jesus is retelling the story of God's work in your own life. Like, can you go back and name what he's done and the way he's been a gift to you? If not, go do that. Like, take an hour or two in a journal somewhere and go, hey, let's see if I can sort of piece the threads together of what God's done in my life. And so you're ready when this time comes. Like, hey, let me tell you a little bit about my story. And the fact that I was a skeptic, or I had no spiritual influence growing up, or whatever else you might have in common with the people you're talking with. And then last one, can I tell you God's story? And for this one, do a little bit of homework at least, like know enough to know, like, yeah, this is more than just, hey, I can tell you how to get to heaven when you die. Well, let me tell you what God has done on the planet and the invitation for your life now and your future and the walking with him, Lord as your shepherd kind of life, right? Let me tell you that story of the grand life now and future he's inviting you to. So do a little bit of homework. So when we started with this group of guys, like what I did, they came in, they all told their story on week 1, like, hey, just tell everybody in the room your life story, the 6 of them, and they did it. It was amazing. And then the next week I was like, hey, tell me one question that's sort of blocking you moving toward God. And so they all threw those in, about 10 of them, and that just became the topics for the weeks to come. And so we've talked a lot about in Romans 1, 2, and 3, and why we think God invented the universe versus random chance, and like all kinds of stuff. We've talked about suffering. We've talked about the guilt that comes from maybe more like a Catholic background. Like, we've talked about all kinds of stuff, and their questions became our topics. And pretty much what I go in with, I just go in with a lot of questions, some teaching, but a lot of questions, right? So God's story. All right, so John 20:21 says, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. And I think the spirit of this morning is for you to consider, for your work people, I think God's probably put you there. What do you want to do with that? He's probably sending you there. You might be missing some cues and some clues, but what if you started paying attention and being intentional about that? What would that look like? The cool part is at the end of the day, you're not responsible for results. You're responsible for being there and being faithful and asking questions and listening and, talking when it's time to talk and shutting up when it's time to shut up, right? be there, be faithful, and see what God will do as you partner with him in your workplace. So let's pray.